Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS, a one-stop destination for all the English medium civil services aspirants. On Saturday, the Government of India announced a new type of a pension scheme for the government employees, which would start becoming applicable from the 1st April 2025, that is the next financial year. And once this was announced, there has been a lot of discussion surrounding the concept of UPS and how is it different compared to the NPS, which is applicable right now, along with the OPS. Now, some of you might be thinking, sir, what is this UPS? What is the long form of it? What is the NPS? What is OPS? What are the features? What are the differences, etc. In this video, we will have a detailed discussion regarding all the three different forms or the types of pension systems and why ultimately the Government of India has decided to announce the Unified Pension Scheme, or else known as UPS. Now, before I start the discussion, listen to a very important announcement. We at Unacademy have dropped the prices to the lowest of 24,999 rupees, that is 24,999 rupees for 18 months course. We are offering a 50% off and also extension of up to 6 months. If you are interested and if there are anybody or any other aspirants you know who are looking for a quality coaching, please do recommend us. Details are provided in the section below. Now, let me start the discussion. The discussion will be focused on what is OPS, what are the advantages and disadvantages or concerns, why did we shift to NPS, what are the concerns regarding the NPS, and finally, why did we decide or why did Government of India decide to implement UPS. And in the process of comparing all of this, I will also give you certain important points which have been mentioned by Reserve Bank of India's study on the OPS as well as the NPS. Let's start. In the beginning, that is basically before NPS was introduced, from 1st January 2004, the government employees were provided the pension upon the retirement or upon superannuation under a system called as pension scheme. Now, why this is called as old pension scheme now? Like I said earlier, from 1st January 2004, the government introduced a new type of a scheme, pension scheme, which was referred to as NPS, new pension scheme, and as a result of the introduction of NPS, the earlier pension scheme was referred to as old pension scheme. So, OPS and NPS. Now, what are the features of the OPS? But before that, whenever you talk about the salary, obviously because upon the salary that you draw, your pension would be decided or determined. Whenever you talk about the salary, please understand, the salary has multiple components. The most important component is the basic salary. In addition to the basic salary, there are a lot of allowances such as medical allowance, housing rent allowance, travelling allowance, etc., which are provided by the government or even for that matter private sector companies to their employees. So, whenever you talk about the pensions, please remember, the pensions are usually determined based on the concept of basic salary. It is on the basic salary. So, under the old pension system, under the OPS, whatever was my last drawn salary, I repeat, whatever was my last drawn salary, and within that specifically the basic salary, 50% of this basic salary was provided to me in the form of pension upon superannuation or upon retirement. And please remember this particular point, this is very, very important. To get this particular pension, I did not contribute anything to the government. During the course of my work, during my tenure of the service, I did not contribute any money. I got my salary. None of the component of the salary or not even a single rupee was deducted by the government to provide me pension upon my retirement. I did not contribute anything. Government of India ensured that whatever funding was required to provide pension to me, every rupee's burden was borne by the government. That's a very, very important point to note here. So, it was not a contributory scheme. I did not contribute anything as an employee, but it was a defined benefit scheme, wherein it was guaranteed that whatever is my last drawn basic salary, 50% of it I would get upon my retirement. This is a speciality about old pension scheme. Just imagine a government employee draws a certain amount of salary before the retirement, and upon retirement 50% of the basic salary they will keep on receiving. Of course, please remember this also. Some of you will basically say, sir, I read somewhere it includes DA also. That is a certain type of allowance, dearness allowance and dearness relief. For pensioners it is dearness relief, for the current employees it is called as a dearness allowance. So, whatever is the allowance in the form of dearness, that was also included when the pension was determined under the OPS. So, come back to the point here. If you are a government employee, if I am a government employee, not even a single rupee I will contribute, point number 1. Point number 2, upon retirement there is a fixed amount of pension that I will receive and it is not taxable. Obviously, you will like this kind of a system or the scheme. I will also prefer this kind of a pension scheme. This is the precise reason why, despite it being more than 2 decades of introduction of NPS, even today many states have reverted back to OPS, and many of the employees prefer OPS compared to NPS. But having said so, there were a lot of concerns or issues regarding the old pension scheme. What are the concerns or issues? Point number 1. In the OPS, the employee does not contribute anything, and whatever pension has to be paid, it is paid by government. And the government's burden, be it the state government or be it the central government, the government's burden will always keep on increasing. And mind you, whatever money is paid by the government, either the center or the state, it is the money of the taxpayers. You have paid taxes, I have paid taxes, and the employee's salary will keep on getting revised every now and then in the form of, let us say, pay commission recommendations, in the form of the DAs, dearness allowance and dearness relief, etc. Again, reiterate this particular point. DA is for the existing employees, DR is for retired employees. So, every now and then, that is to be very technically sound here, in the month of January and in the month of July, Government of India announces a change in the dearness allowance, and the dearness allowance is announced by the government just to ensure that whatever is the inflation rate will not hurt the government employees. So, again the point is simple here, the salaries are getting changed every now and then, and when the salaries keep on getting changed, the pension burden of government will also keep on increasing. In addition to this, with improvement of technology and better healthcare services, now the people will be living for a longer duration. According to various surveys, the adult population, that is above the age of 65 years, essentially adult, specifically within that the pensioner population or elderly population, it was around 8% in the year 2015, and by the year 2050 in the global market, this is expected to increase beyond 20%, which essentially means with a longer period of life expectancy, the government's bill in the form of pension outgo under the old pension scheme will keep on increasing, and that will become a very huge burden for the government, be it the center or be it the state. Just to prove this particular point, please have a look at the table that is provided in the slide. The center's burden under the pension bill 1990 and 91 was basically 3,272 crore rupees, and by 20 and 21 it has increased to 1.9 lakh crore rupees, and mind you, this despite introducing NPS from the year 2004, And what about the state government's burden? It was 3,131 crore rupees for 90 and 91. By 20 and 21, it has increased to 3.86 lakh crore rupees. And again the point is, despite introducing NPS, and you will understand what is the benefit of NPS in a minute. Despite this, the burden of pensions has increased upon the center and states to such a great extent. Imagine if only OPS was there, the burden, financial burden or the expenditure incurred by the government would be much higher, beyond control. It could have been a financial disaster as well. So, rising burden which is unsustainable on the shoulders of the government, burden on the taxpayers as well. You pay taxes, I pay taxes. We expect this amount to be utilized for the development of infrastructure, for providing welfare. But if Government of India will use this money to provide to the pensions, to provide pensions under OPS, which is a very large number and it will keep on increasing over a period of time, we have to bear the burden of the amount of pensions that the government will pay. Third one, there is absolutely no contribution from the employee. It is a defined benefit scheme where the employee upon retirement is assured of certain fixed amount of pension without any contribution. Why should the employee get so much amount of money upon retirement when they do not contribute even a single rupee, right, out of this particular amount they receive? And finally, it is unfunded by the basic government. That is, unfunded essentially means from one year to next year, government out of the total budget will keep on allocating money, and this will definitely have a huge impact on what are the areas where the government should be spending money. It will put a lot of pressure on the revenue expenditures of the government, on the overall borrowings or borrowing bills of the Government of India. So, it is unfunded by the beneficiary, but the sponsor is bearing the full burden of, right, let us say the pension that would be paid to the employees upon superannuation. In order to address this issue, the Government of India, please remember, in 1998 set up OASIS. OASIS basically stands for Old Age, Social and Income Security. Old Age, Social and Income Security. It was headed by S.A. Dave, S.A. Dave, right, the SEBI chairperson. And based on the recommendations of this committee, Government of India started thinking of revamping the idea for old pension scheme. And to be very precise here, this committee was not actually established to look into the pension system of Government of India. It was actually established or set up to look at the pension system for informal workers. But anyways, the recommendations given by this committee were actually utilized by Government of India. In fact, after OASIS, there was one more committee which was set up by the government, HLEG, High Level Expert Group, HLEG, High Level Expert Group, which was actually headed by Mr. B.K. Bhattacharya. Mr. B.K. Bhattacharya. In fact, they also gave recommendations, but these recommendations were not acceptable to the Government of India. That is the reason the Government of India took the recommendations from the OASIS group and applied these recommendations to the government employees. And that led to introduction of a new type of a pension scheme by the name of NPS, New Pension Scheme, which came into force, again I repeat, from the 1st January 2004. Now, what are the features of the new pension scheme? Under the new pension scheme, understand this, the contributions for the pension would come from both the sponsor essentially would be the government here, and the employee. It would come from both the sponsor as well as the employee. That is, let us say I am a central government employee. If I want to be enrolled under NPS, which is required now, 10% of my basic salary, 10% of my basic salary I will have to contribute, and right, I will be getting pension upon my superannuation. 10% from my side, 10% from the central government side. But this 10% later on was increased by Government of India to 14%. That is basically in 2019, it was increased to 14%, 14%. Right. So, basically here the contribution would be done by me also as well as the center also. Point number 1. Point number 2, this scheme was a defined contribution scheme. It was a defined contribution scheme. Essentially here, how much would be my contribution? It was actually defined. It was fixed. But on the other side, upon my, let us say, retirement, what would happen is 60% of the corpus, whatever the funding is contributed totally now, 60% of the corpus I would be withdrawing. That option was given to me, and this was non-taxable. This was non-taxable. No taxes were imposed on this, and when I say taxes, of course I am talking about income taxes here. And remaining 40%, I would choose a particular fund house, and they would invest this in the market and fix a certain amount of returns, not fixed here, right, corrected, not fixed, certain amount of returns would be provided to me. This was called as annuity plan. This was referred to as annuity plan. And the problem with the concept of NPS for government employees was that here whatever amount you invest in the market, point number 1, listen to me carefully now, the returns were not guaranteed, that is returns were not fixed. Imagine certain amount is invested in the stock market, are you sure, are you guaranteed how much income you would be earning from this? Absolutely no. In some year it could be very high, in some year it could be very, very less. So, this particular 40% which was invested in the market, the returns were not fixed and returns were volatile. Please remember, returns were uncertain. That was the biggest problem associated with the new pension scheme. Point number 2, whatever returns you earned under the annuity plan, it was taxable. It was taxable. Taxable in the sense, whatever was your incomes, based on that income taxes you will be paying, and whatever income tax slab you are in, the same rate would be applicable on this returns that you earn under the NPS. So, taxable. And the third problem was, if you compare between OPS and NPS, you will realize that in case of OPS, if my salary was, let us say hypothetically 1 lakh rupees, I would receive all the 1 lakh rupees, of course, not accounting for income taxes, etc. Do not worry about it. I would receive all of it. But in case of NPS, in addition to the tax deductions, etc., there would also be a deduction in the form of NPS contribution. So, if you imagine or if you ignore the other deductions such as income taxes, obviously the take home salary under OPS would be greater compared to the take home salary under the NPS. That was one more issue. So, these are some of the reasons why many of the government employees were unhappy with the concept of a new pension scheme. And this is, please remember this, it is a defined contribution scheme. Now, what were the fund houses? What kind of investment houses were identified under this? PFRDA periodically would identify certain fund houses where you as a government employee, when you contribute to NPS, again there is a tier 1, tier 2, do not worry about all of it, you could determine how much would be invested through which fund house or through which investment houses. Totally more than 10 fund houses were identified, such as SBI, not SEBI, SBI, LIC, UTI, HDFC, ICICI, etc., etc. So, these are certain important points regarding the NPS. What were the concerns regarding this? No guaranteed returns, lot of volatility, and whatever returns you got, it was dependent upon the market fluctuations. The risk was very, very high for me. I contributed and the risk was very, very high. Deduction from the salary of the employee, but to be very precise here, remember this, whatever contributions you did under NPS, that contribution was not taxable. You could claim the benefits in the form of deduction under the Income Tax Act of 1961. So, looking at all of this, I am pretty sure all of you, if you are thinking from the viewpoint of the government of India or the state government for that matter, you will agree that the second one, that is the NPS, is far better for the government, but not good for the government employees who want to receive more pension upon retirement. But if you are thinking from the side of the employees, you would prefer the OPS over NPS because you would be getting much higher amount of pension under the OPS compared to NPS. And by the way, again the contribution under NPS is not on the full salary, 10% of not the full salary, again focus on the concept of basic salary. And that is the precise reason in the last couple of years there have been multiple the trade unions or multiple employee unions which have been calling the state governments, central government to introduce OPS. And many of the state governments, after the elections were over, in many of the state governments, they have reverted back, they have actually reverted back to the concept of OPS itself, and which has been rightly criticized by many of the experts, including Reserve Bank of India. Now, what kind of, let us say, what kind of difference exists between all of these particular schemes from the study that was conducted by RBI? Let me give you certain details. RBI last year published a survey, in the month of September published a survey, where they compared defined contributions versus defined benefit. And if you are still confused what is a defined contribution and a defined benefit would be OPS and defined contribution would be NPS. Investment risk was borne by the plan member under the defined contribution. That is, once I choose where this would be invested, through which, let us say, fund house it would be invested, the money would be invested in the market. But the risk that is associated with these investments, I will bear the burden of it. Plan member essentially means the one who has opted for the pension scheme. So, the investment risk would be borne by the plan member under DC, whereas under DB, the government, which is a sponsor, will be bearing the burden. Imagine, under the OPS, the employee has not contributed anything. Government needs to ensure sufficient amount of money is available, and whatever investments they have done, returns, if they are not satisfactory, if the returns are very less, etc., all the risk is borne by the government itself. The fund itself has to be created by the government itself. Longevity risk. What do you mean by longevity risk? What if a person, because of better health care, etc., if they outlive the period of the benefits that they get? Because please understand this, because of better technology, better health care, etc., the life period of a person increases, and with the increasing lifespan of a person, the amount of pension that will be provided by the government automatically will start increasing, the burden will start increasing. So, longevity risk is borne by the plan member here, whereas in case of the defined benefit will be borne by the government itself. Contribution burden, how much would be contributed by the government and the beneficiary, that is the employee. In case of the defined contribution, center will contribute and the employee will also contribute, whereas in case of a defined benefit, every rupee that is contributed, every rupee that will be used to provide pension will come from the government itself. And financial burden here simply means if the investments that are done in the market, if they do not perform very well, then who will have to bear the additional cost? In case of the defined contribution, as a government, I can always fix your contribution. I will simply say 10% of a basic salary, please contribute. And because it is invested in the market, if the market returns are lesser, you will have to bear the risk. I do not fill the gap, I do not provide for any shortfall there. So, in case of DC, it is always the plan member. In case of a defined benefit, how much money has to be kept aside, how much money has to be given to each of the members who are pensioners, etc. right? What if what if my investments are not getting sufficient amount of returns, etc.? All of that burden will fall on the shoulders of government. So you will see that in case of a DB, all the risks are borne by the government, whereas in case of DC, most of the risks are borne by the plan member alone. In some cases, right, it will be shared with the government as well. Right, so this is what RBI said, comparing the DB as well as the DC, and RBI was in the favor of going for the defined contribution. In fact, RBI report also says if the state governments will go back, they will jump back to the idea of a OPS, it will be a financial disaster, because if they start providing the idea of a OPS now, let us say after 20 years or after 15 years, the pension bill for the state would be much high, which is unmanageable. That is the reason they batted in favor of defined contribution schemes itself. Now, having seen the concept of OPS and NPS, let us try and understand what is the latest pension scheme introduced by the government last Saturday, which will come into force from the next financial year, that is a Unified Pension Scheme, UPS. The UPS basically functions on 5 very important pillars. One, assured pension. Second one is the family pension. Third one is the minimum pension. Fourth one is the inflation adjustment. And finally, the fifth one, lump sum payment. Let us go one by one. First one, the Government of India states that anybody who will opt for UPS, that is right, if you opt for UPS, because it is not compulsory, if you want to choose NPS, it is still available. If you want to choose UPS, it will be available for you. Although the expectation is that the benefits under NPS will be very less compared to UPS. Hence, most of the employees, if not all, most of the employees, it could be all as well, are expected to jump to the UPS itself now. So, first one, assured pension, right? What is the assured pension here? Whatever is your last drawn salary in the sense the average salary of last 12 months, and again please understand, salary here would mean basic salary plus DA, okay. So, average salary of last 12 months, that would be taken, and right, please understand, 50% of that would be provided in the form of a pension upon your superannuation. Now, what is the use of this? How is it different compared to earlier system? Is it the same as OPS? Absolutely no. Understand this carefully. Imagine you are an employee of Government of India, and the last drawn salary that you drew, you got a promotion, and just 2 months before your retirement, your salary increased, which means your last drawn salary will be basically the higher income that you have drawn upon your promotion. But in this case, for 10 months you worked at the same position, last 2 months before your retirement you got, let us say, promoted, you will not be getting 50% of the last salary, no, you will have to take the average of the higher salary plus the previous 10 months salary. That is a very important difference, please make a note of this. So, the 12 months average salary will be taken, and 50% of that will be provided by the government. That is a point number 1. Second one, family pension. If the person who is the government employee retired, but if they retire and they are drawing the pension, and if they pass away, upon the demise of this pensioner, the family will be getting 60% of the pension that is drawn by the pensioner here. That is the second very important pillar. Third very important pillar, minimum pension. If you are having a term, that is, if you are working for the government from 10 years to 25 years, you will be getting a minimum pension of 10,000 rupees, and above that the first pillar would be applicable to you. Fourth one, inflation indexation. What is this idea of a inflation indexation? Which inflation index is actually used here? Listen to me carefully. As of now, if you are a government employee, that is a central government employee, as earlier mentioned, the government of India every year, that is in the month of January and in the month of July, will announce something called as dearness allowance, DA, dearness allowance. And the dearness allowance that is announced is dependent upon, it is dependent upon the CPI IW, CPI industrial workers. Please make a note of this. It is not dependent on CPI combined. It is not dependent on CPI rural, CPI urban, etc. It is dependent on CPI IW. So, what is the CPI IW? It is measured for a specific time period, and how much is the variation in CPI IW? Your dearness allowance will also be changed by the same percentage. That is called as inflation indexation for the government employees. So, all India CPI IW will be taken and the same indexation will be provided to the pensioners. In case of pensioners, instead of DA, this will be called as a DR, dearness relief. So, inflation indexation will be provided, and finally, when you are working once every 6 months, 10% of your basic salary you will have to contribute once every 6 months, and upon your retirement, in addition to the gratuity, you will also be receiving a lump sum amount, right. One shot, a lump sum amount would be given to you in addition to the gratuity that you are going to receive upon your retirement or upon your superannuation. So, these are the 5 very important pillars that differentiate the UPS compared to the OPS as well as the NPS. In a nutshell, if you just make observations, you will realize that we have taken certain features from OPS, we have also taken certain features from NPS, and we have used this to provide a new scheme called as a unified pension scheme. Now, when I say we have taken certain features from OPS and NPS, what about the central government contribution here? That I have not told. What about the center's contribution? Center says, in earlier system, that is under the NPS, I used to contribute 14%, and under OPS complete contribution was mine only. Now, here it would be increased from 14% to 18.5%. It would be increased from 14% to over 18%. That will be the increased contribution from the central government, and that is the reason. If you have read the newspapers, you will know this. Because of this scheme, the outlay of government of India will increase by over 7,000 crore rupees in the first year. It will increase by around 7,000 crore rupees. So, these are certain very important features of unified pension scheme. Now, if you make a comparison between all the three, this table is what you will get. In case of OPS, guaranteed 50%, not 15, 50% of your salary as well as right dearness allowance adjustments. You will also be getting the gratuity. You do not have to provide any kind of a contribution, and you will be getting a fixed pension. Whereas in case of NPS, the returns will be market connected, market linked. That is 40%, that is in the form of annuities, which will be invested in the market, that will determine how much pension you are going to get. No guaranteed pension here. Tax benefits are there. In essence, 60% of the money corpus that you withdraw, no taxes. The contribution that you do to NPS is not taxable, you can claim deduction on it. Employee has to contribute and withdrawals are allowed. In case of UPS, just make a comparison now. You will see that you will get 50% of average basic pay for the 12 months before the superannuation. You will also get inflation indexation and guaranteed pension, not only for the pensioner but also for the family. Assured family pension, inflation protection is provided, and you will get 50%, that is fixed amount of pension, that whatever salary that you have drawn 12 months prior to your superannuation. So, this is basically the comparison between the UPS, OPS as well as the NPS. This can be asked in the UPSC examination. Please be very, very careful. Done? Now, based on the discussion that you have done, in case of all the 3 different types of pension systems, I have given one MCQ. Let me solve this. Consider the following statements regarding CPI IW, CPI Industrial Workers. It is published by Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Wrong. It is published by Ministry of Labour. Second, it has a base year of 2011 and 12. Most of you will be tempted to say yes, it is correct. My dear, it is wrong. The base year for CPIW is 2016. So, B is wrong. The basket includes the goods as well as services. This is correct. This is absolutely correct. The basket, 400 plus items are there under this. It includes both goods as well as services. Third statement is wrong. I'm sorry, correct. First and second are wrong. Right option for this question will be option A. Only one is correct. So, that is it from my side regarding the discussion of NPS, OPS culminating into UPS. If you like this initiative or the discussion that I have had, please do not forget to hit the like button and do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel right now. Thank you. Have a great day.